Hey, stay right there today. It's fun to have a conversation with the coach, and he is the owner of bicycle shop, Montlake Bicycle Shop. He's founder and owner of Montlake Bicycle Shop. Please help me welcome Neil Wechsler. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you for inviting me, Bashir.
Let me start with this. Where were you? What happened? Who are you surrounded with that inspired you to do what you do today?
Well, if you go back to the beginning, it was 1970. I moved to Seattle to go to the University of Washington, and I was a little bit lost there, not knowing really what my purpose for going to college was. And so after 2 quarters, I dropped out and I looked for something else to do. Um, I didn't take it seriously, but I did go to bike shops, and just because it was something I love doing is bike riding and fixing bikes. So I looked for a job. I didn't find one, but then that summer, a lot of other things went on. I read 2 books when I was a teenager then that had a big effect on me. One was a book called The Population Bomb by Paul and Ann Ehrlich, and another was Diet for a Small Planet by Francis Moore Lepay. And both of these books really addressed a lot of the problems that are looming so seriously today as far as environmental problems, the climate crisis. They weren't specifically about the climate crisis, but they were about how we were headed in that direction. And then that summer, or that spring, I heard about a new program at a new campus of the University of Wisconsin called University of Wisconsin Green Bay. And the program was all about environmental problem solving. That's what the whole campus was for. Every program, whether you were in history, in science, in art, in anything, the focus was still about environmental problem solving. And so I thought this was really exciting. And I applied there, I got in, and I spent the next 3 years in Green Bay, and I loved it. I was in science. My major was ecology, and that was great. And after I finished there, I spent the next 6 years studying and working as a scientist in the plant sciences. I got a master's degree in botany, and I worked in plant pathology, and it was all great, except for it was too theoretical. I wanted to be doing something practical, and not that there are definitely long-term benefits to studying ecology and the things we were doing, but I wanted to do something more tangible. And I was having a hard time with some of the career directions I went in science. And so I had been offered a job, a part-time job at a very tiny bike shop. I was the first employee there. So while I was in graduate school, I was working in a bike shop that was tiny but growing. And it was called Paul's Bicycle Shop, and Paul Nicholson was the one who, it was named for. And that got me kind of an alternative to science for a career direction. And I liked bicycles because the reason I was started in the direction I was going was because of my interest in the environment and in preservation of the quality of life. And so bicycles are just fantastic as very low consumption vehicles, very clean transportation. I never really thought about being in business. It's just that it was a thing to do that I found out I eventually became very good at. I thought I knew a ton about bicycles until I started working there. And then I thought I knew a lot about business until I opened my own business. But over the years, I learned. And so now 40 years later, or more than 40 years later, I'm winding up that career.
What are top three mistakes to avoid?
Okay. Well, I would say the first one would be that managers need to put management first. And too often, I think, especially in a retail setting, which is where my experience is, there's just so many different things that everybody's doing and the managers are doing. And it's too easy to ignore what the employees are doing. And the employees are your biggest expense and your biggest asset. And that's why you have managers, is to make sure that they are able to be effective. Every employee needs to know, they need to know what their job is. They need to know how to do their job. They need to have the resources to do the job well. They need to know when each job should be done. They need to know why they're doing a job, and it's a lot. But with those things covered, the store runs very well. And so that would be my first one. My second one would be that we shouldn't jump to conclusions. There are so many things where something seems one way and you start asking questions and you find out there's a whole lot more to it than you ever thought. And so that applies with customers, that applies with your staff, that applies with your suppliers, it applies with everybody. And it's just once you take a few minutes and always ask as many questions as you can to really fully understand the situation that you're dealing with, and you can do a better job with it. And then my third option here would be to avoid too much rigidity in how you run the business. It's very valuable to have clear policies. Everybody should know what the company policies are. You should have a mechanism for communicating it to everybody, but you also need to have a clear purpose or mission to your business. And sometimes the two things don't go together that well. And so everybody should understand that if there's a way to go beyond our standard policies, the policies, set guidelines, but sometimes you go beyond the guidelines to help a customer. But even more important, the management should go beyond the basic policies whenever possible to help out an employee. Everybody's got different needs, things change, and as long as you're not doing something that is in conflict with what your purpose is there, it's really good to not be too rigid. And so then my third thing, or did I already do three? I can't remember now.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you. And we move to the second question, which is similar. What is your greatest failure story, and what did you learn, and how did you recover from it?
Okay, so I opened my store in 1980. In 1988, a lot had changed in the bicycle business, and the big thing was the advent of mountain bicycles. It had been when I opened the business, they were a non-factor in the industry. It was a hobby. People were making them for fun, for themselves, and there was just a very beginning of people with very tiny companies making bikes to sell, but that was not what was happening with mountain bikes. And then through the 80s, they just grew and grew to the point where it was becoming what everybody was asking for. If they just wanted a bicycle, if they came in the store, they didn't want what we were calling 10-speed bikes back then. They wanted a mountain bike typically. And in 1988, it came upon me that in the whole area east of Seattle has like the city, and there's Lake Washington separates it from the main suburbs. And the whole suburban area to the east of us, there were no mountain bike stores. There was just one in Seattle proper. And so somehow I got this idea that I would open a mountain bike store over there. And I found a great location for it. It was a building that was big, at least for my needs. It was plenty big. It had character. It had parking, and it was not expensive at all. It was a building that was slated for redevelopment. And so the landlord, in the interim, before they were going to demolish it, they were letting it be leased out for a very low price. And so I did that, and we got off to a good start, but I never really prepared for the difference between running a store and running a multi-store bicycle business. And I hadn't really learned enough about management and about doing that. It's just the extra complexities surprised me. I was expecting an economy of scale, and what I found were just extra costs of scale more than that. And we got by pretty well anyhow for the first few years because rent is such a big thing, and it was so low where I was that I just didn't have to run that efficiently. And if I just run it for that first 5 years, that they took them 11 years before they ever demolished the building. If I just ran it for those first 5 years, then it would have been okay. I could have closed it, said it was fun. But instead, I let the landlord, after the first 5 years were up, he approximately doubled the rent. And that just took all the profit out of it. And so what I had was a lot more cost, a lot more work, but I was earning less. And on top of that, after the first few years and it was going well, in 1992, I opened a third store. And I did it for, what seemed like a good reason, which was that in the next town over, Kirkland, Washington, the only bicycle store in town was closing. And so there was going to be no bicycle store there. So what an open opportunity it seemed like. And so I did that. And I was even less prepared for that. So I went on for years, just sort of, with 3 stores. Always my Seattle store did fine, but the other 2 would do well or do poorly. And every year it was like never all 3 in sync, and it just wasn't great. So how did I recover? Was I consolidated the 2 suburban stores, and I made a partner. I sold part of the ownership of the East Side store, made it a separate company, sold it to a long-term employee, so that he was. We had an on-site owner, and it was run quite independently. I was there, available to help any way they wanted, but I wasn't interfering, and I wasn't trying to run the store. So my life was easier. And then over the last 12 years since we did that, it's done well, it's earned money, and so that's been good.
What are your top 3 success secrets that others can follow?
Okay. Well, I'm going to say my first one is to think holistically and long term. One of the big techniques for doing that is to always focus on under promising and over delivering. And that just hits so many things, whether you're talking with customers about when their bike will be repaired or how well some product is going to work for them or whatever. You don't want to give them bad surprises when you're talking to your employees, when you're talking to your suppliers, all of them. You just want to work towards the long term and make sure that you're not promising more than you can do. And then my second one is to take responsibility for what goes on in your business. It's keep in mind that it's your job to recruit new people, to interview them, to hire people, to train them, and to motivate them. And when things go wrong and somebody does something that has bad consequences, remember that it's because you failed in one or more of those steps. And so you need to learn from it. You need to help resolve it, but um, really take responsibility for it, and just try to pick do better with your employees in the future. Sometimes things do go bad with people, and you do have to fire people. And as long as you realize that it's your own failing that caused that to happen, and then you learn from the circumstances, that is the way to keep going forward. And then for a third one is to talk about timeliness, being prompt about doing everything is really good. I said, take a few minutes to ask questions whenever you can, but don't take days to get things done. So if it's a problem with something's going on with a customer, then you need to call the customer before they find out about the problem. You need to be ahead of the game, and putting things off only makes problems a lot worse usually.
Thank you. We are starting a speed round. That means short questions and quick answers. Neil, are you ready for it?
Yes, sir.
What is the most impactful business book you have read, and what did you learn from it?
Well, there are a lot of excellent books I've read, and I've listened to many of your podcasts, Bashir, and so I didn't want to bring up ones that have been repeatedly shown before. And I didn't happen to see this one. It's called The Coaching Habit. It's by Michael Bungay Stanier, and I thought it was great. I like the fact that it's kind of modest in size. It didn't take forever to read, but it avoided a ton of unnecessary repetition. It's about both coaching and habits. So it's about learning how to develop good habits. There's nothing easy about it, but it is possible to break habits that are counterproductive. And then about the coaching, it's a really big part of what I think about, ever since I read it in management, which is that part about asking more questions, listening to what people say, and rather than trying to tell people what to do, help them learn for themselves what to do. It's just really, that was a good book.
What do you want to be remembered for?
Well, from my business, what I want to be remembered for is that I helped a lot of people enjoy bike riding as much as I do. And then personally, I just want to be remembered as a kind person that was giving.
How do you overcome a challenge life throws at you?
Well, you just have to recognize that nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm gonna, whatever the challenge is, I can accept the consequences. If they're good or bad, learn from them and do the best you can and just go on, and it'll be fine. There'll be more challenges ahead.
What do you want to do when you grow up?
Well, what I want to do now, because I am retiring from my bicycle store, this will be my last summer scheduled on the sales floor in the office, to be there. I will be retaining part ownership of the business. I own the building, so I'm be very involved in my bike store going forward, but I do want to go on to another career. And I started it just a couple of years ago, working with other small businesses. I've made enough mistakes. I've studied enough. I've learned. I've listened. I learned a lot about running a small business over the last 40 plus years. And I do want to share that with other people. And so I've helped a couple of other businesses, a local electric bike business I spent some time with, and another store that a farm store that I've been consulting with. So I'm looking to do more with outreach like that.
I'm just reminding we are in speed round, so we have to
Oh, that
get
was a
to
long answer.
another meeting afterwards.
Okay, I'll speed it up.
What are you grateful for today?
Okay, I'm grateful for the many thousands of people that have made my career at Montlake Bicycle Shop so successful and so enjoyable to do. So my customers, my suppliers, my staff, and especially my family.
Who is your living mentor, and what is the impact they have on you?
Well, in early my career, Paul Nicholson, my first employer in the bike business, was certainly my mentor, and he was always very generous and helped me in any way he could. But now, really, it's my wife and my daughter who I look to for advice and wisdom, and they're very good at it.
Why is being impactful important to you?
Well, it's like, what other choice do we have? First of all, there's nothing more rewarding than doing something for other people. But we're in such a bad situation with what we've done to the environment. It's our responsibility to give our children, the whole next generation, and generations that follow, a world where they can live a happy life. And yet we're doing so much to make it terrible with climate change and other problems that if we don't do something, who else is going to? So we just do the best we can to make an impact, to make a better world.
Who is your ideal client?
Well, in my interest in doing consulting, my ideal client would be somebody with a small to medium-sized business, ideally a retail business, because that's where my most experience is, although a lot of the same things would apply to non-retail settings. But somebody either starting out who wants to get going right, or somebody established who really just wants to face management challenges that are difficult for them and wants to do better.
How can we support you?
Well, you can connect me with anybody who might be able to use my help. And I have a document that I wrote that's very concise, broad-ranging, but short, about, it's entitled A Retail Store Owner's Manual. And I would be happy to provide that to anybody for free who wants to contact me, and I'll send it out to them. They can get to know me and what I can do.
What would you say about your guest experience on the show?
Well, I would say that, you asked about how I face challenges. This was a challenge. I faced it. But it was very good. I appreciate being invited. It's just great.
Let's wrap up the show. So I have a last question. What would you say as a final word?
Well, I think everybody should realize how great bicycle riding can make your life. If you do it, that's great. If you don't, you should give it a try. And as far as work goes, just do your best and be proud of what you accomplish.
Neil Wechsler, thank you so much for your time and wisdom on the behalf of Entrepreneur Empowerment Club and our entire team. We really appreciate you. I hope our path cross again with another amazing guest. Until then, you have a wonderful time.
Thank you, Bashir.